Thomas Evans had always dreamed big. From a young age, he knew he wanted to build something important. Growing up in a small town, he didn't have much. His family was poor, but his parents always encouraged him to work hard and never give up. They believed that with enough dedication, anything was possible. When Thomas finished school, he moved to the city to chase his dreams. He started working at a small tech company. He was only one of many workers, but his mind was different. He didn't just do his job. He always looked for ways to improve things. He worked late nights, learned new skills, and took on more responsibility than anyone else. Soon, his hard work paid off. He got promoted, then promoted again. It wasn't long before Thomas realized that working for someone else wouldn't give him the freedom or success he wanted. He wanted to own his own company, to create something that could change the world. So he took a big step. He started his own business. It was a small tech startup, but he believed in his ideas, and he worked harder than ever to make them real. At first, it was difficult. Thomas didn't have a lot of money, and the competition was fierce. He spent sleepless nights figuring out how to get his products noticed. But his big break came when he developed a new software that helped businesses save time and money. The software was so useful that it quickly became popular, and soon, many big companies were buying it. With his first big deal, Thomas's business began to grow rapidly. He hired more people, improved his products, and soon his company was making millions. As the business expanded, so did Thomas's wealth. People started to notice him, and he became a well-known figure in the tech world. He was featured in magazines and newspapers as one of the most successful young entrepreneurs. Thomas didn't stop there. He was always thinking ahead. He knew that in business you had to keep evolving. He began to invest in other companies, helping them grow as well. He wasn't just building his own success. He was creating opportunities for others. His vision for the future was clear. He wanted to change the way the world worked, using technology to make life easier for everyone. Over time, Thomas's company became one of the biggest in the world. He had thousands of employees, offices in many countries, and his products were used by millions of people every day. He had become a billionaire, a person whose name was recognized around the globe. His family was proud of him, especially his wife Eleanor, who stood by him through every step of his journey. Together, they had a beautiful home and a daughter named Lily. Thomas's life seemed perfect. He had it all: wealth, success, a loving family, and respect from everyone in the business world. People often saw him as an example of what hard work and dedication could achieve. He was invited to speak at conferences, attend glamorous parties, and meet other powerful people. But despite all the attention, Thomas remained humble. He never forgot his roots, the hard work that had gotten him to where he was. At home, Thomas was a devoted father. He loved spending time with Lily, his young daughter. Every weekend, they would go on family trips, exploring new places. Thomas made sure to teach Lily the values he had learned growing up, the importance of kindness, honesty, and hard work. He wanted to give her a life full of opportunities, just as he had worked to create his own. Eleanor, his wife, played a key role in supporting Thomas's dreams. While Thomas focused on growing his business, Eleanor took care of their home and their daughter. She was his rock, always offering encouragement when the going got tough. They made a great team, and their relationship was built on trust and mutual respect. Eleanor had always believed in Thomas, even when things were difficult in the early days. Now, seeing his success, she couldn't be prouder. But Thomas wasn't just focused on making money. He also wanted to give back to the community. He started a foundation to help children in need, offering scholarships, mentorship, and opportunities for education. He believed that everyone, no matter where they came from, should have the chance to succeed, just like he had. He often said, "Success isn't just about wealth. It's about making a difference in the lives of others." Thomas's story inspired many people around the world. His rise from a small-town boy to a billionaire was a story of determination, ambition, and belief in oneself. It showed that no dream was too big if you were willing to work for it. He became a symbol of success, a man who had overcome the odds and achieved greatness. As the years passed, Thomas continued to build his empire. He faced challenges, of course, but he never backed down. He learned from every failure and turned it into a lesson. He knew that the road to success wasn't easy, but he was willing to keep pushing forward, no matter what. In the eyes of the world, Thomas Evans was the epitome of success. He had achieved everything he had set out to do and more. But little did he know, the greatest challenge of his life was yet to come. Thomas Evans had everything he ever wanted. He was a billionaire with a successful business empire, a loving wife and a beautiful daughter. But even with all his achievements, there was a feeling deep inside him that something was missing. As he focused more on expanding his company, he started to notice subtle changes around him. Things that once seemed small now seemed off. One of the first signs came when Thomas began receiving strange phone calls. The calls were always from his business partner, Richard Hayward. Richard had been with Thomas since the beginning of his journey. They had started their first business together, and over the years, their partnership had blossomed. Thomas trusted Richard like a brother. They shared not just business success, but personal moments too. So when Richard called late at night with excuses for missing meetings or delaying important decisions, Thomas thought little of it. However, as the weeks went on, Thomas began to notice something wasn't right. Richard had become distant, avoiding meetings and not answering calls. When they did meet, Richard seemed distracted, as though his mind was elsewhere. There were times when Richard didn't even show up to critical board meetings, leaving Thomas to handle everything on his own. It was around this time that Thomas's company, which was always known for its reliability, started facing unexpected financial losses. Profits began to dip, contracts fell through, and vendors started complaining about missed payments. Thomas was shocked. How could this happen? They had always been a well-oiled machine, with everything running smoothly for years. At first, Thomas thought it was just a temporary problem. Maybe the market had changed, or perhaps it was just a bad quarter. But the problem didn't go away. Instead, it grew worse. The company's reputation began to take a hit, and employees who once admired Thomas started to question his leadership. Rumors about his company's future spread quickly. As the pressure mounted, Thomas decided to dig deeper into the company's financials. One evening, after his wife and daughter had gone to bed, Thomas stayed up late in his office, going over the books with a fine-tooth comb. His fingers hovered over the numbers as he compared bank statements and company accounts. It didn't take long for him to realize something was terribly wrong. Large sums of money had been transferred out of the company's account, and the paper trail led straight to Richard. Thomas was stunned. Richard had been stealing from the company. Not only had he been embezzling money, but he had also been hiding it by creating fake invoices and manipulating the books. The shock of the discovery hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe it. His partner, his friend, had been betraying him for years. The anger that filled Thomas's chest was overwhelming, but even more painful was the feeling of betrayal. Richard wasn't just a business partner. He had been like family. They had shared so many moments together, from celebrating business victories to supporting each other through personal struggles. How could Richard do this to him? How could someone he trusted so much turn on him in such a cruel way? The next morning, Thomas immediately called Richard to confront him. Richard answered the phone casually, as if nothing was wrong. When Thomas told him what he had found, Richard's tone shifted. He denied everything at first, but as Thomas pushed harder, Richard's voice grew colder. "You don't know what you're talking about, Thomas. Maybe you're just overreacting," Richard said. "You should let it go." But Thomas knew it was true. He had seen the evidence with his own eyes. His heart raced as he made one final attempt to reason with Richard. "You're stealing from us, Richard. This is betrayal. I can't let you get away with this." Richard, however, wasn't interested in talking. His voice turned sharp and defensive. "You're nothing without me. You wouldn't have your company, your success, without my help. If you try to expose me, you'll regret it." In that moment, Thomas realized the depth of the betrayal. Richard didn't just steal money. He had been using his position to manipulate Thomas and the entire company. Richard had never cared about the success of the business or the people who worked for it. He was only interested in his own wealth and power. The confrontation didn't end with any resolution. Instead, Richard vanished. He stopped showing up at the office, stopped answering calls, and disappeared from Thomas's life as quickly as he had entered it. But the damage had already been done. Thomas felt trapped. The financial losses were becoming too much for him to handle alone. As the company's reputation continued to suffer, Thomas tried everything he could to keep things afloat. But Richard had set a trap. The money he had taken was gone, and Thomas couldn't recover it. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure on Thomas grew. He started to see how deep Richard's betrayal had gone. It wasn't just the money that had been stolen. It was everything Thomas had worked for, everything he had built. It felt like his entire world was crumbling around him. Soon, things went from bad to worse. Richard had gone to the authorities, accusing Thomas of embezzling the money that Richard himself had taken. He had framed Thomas for the very crimes he had committed. The police believed Richard's story, and before Thomas knew it, he was arrested. The courtroom was a blur. Thomas tried to defend himself, but the evidence was stacked against him. Richard had covered his tracks so well that Thomas's innocence seemed impossible to prove. His company was seized, and soon he found himself behind bars. As he sat in that cold, lonely cell, Thomas couldn't believe how everything had turned upside down. The life he had built, the family he had worked so hard to support, had been shattered by the person he trusted most. He was a man who had once had everything, and now he had nothing. Little did he know, there was one person who had never lost faith in him. One person who was about to risk everything to save his family and his daughter. Lily Evans was just 10 years old when her world fell apart. Before everything changed, life had been perfect. She lived in a grand house with her parents, surrounded by the love and care of a devoted mother and father. Her father, Thomas Evans, was a well-known billionaire, admired by everyone. He would take her on trips to exciting places, buy her anything she wanted, and always made sure she was happy. Her mother, Eleanor, was kind and beautiful, and she always had time to listen to Lily's stories and dreams. Life seemed like a fairy tale. But that fairy tale quickly turned into a nightmare. One day, Lily's father was arrested. At first, Lily didn't understand what was happening. She watched as her mother spoke in hushed tones to the police, and later, her father was taken away in handcuffs. She didn't know why. All she knew was that her father, the man she loved and admired, was gone. The following days were a blur. Lily was sent to stay with her aunt for a while, but the house felt empty without her parents. She missed her father terribly. Lily had always been very close to Thomas. He was her hero, her protector. He taught her about the stars, about the power of hard work, and how important it was to always be kind to others. Now, without him, everything felt wrong. At first, Lily didn't fully grasp the seriousness of the situation. She didn't understand why her father had been taken away, why she couldn't see him anymore, or why things were so different. She was told that her father was in trouble, but no one explained why. Her mother, Eleanor, was trying to keep things together for the sake of their family, but she was overwhelmed. She was struggling with the financial loss that came with the sudden arrest, and the pressure of managing the company's affairs. She had to handle everything on her own, something she was not used to. Eleanor had always been a supportive wife and mother, but now she was living under a heavy cloud of uncertainty. Her once bright smile faded as she tried to keep up with the demands of her now dwindling resources. The company, once a thriving empire, was on the brink of collapse. Bills piled up, and creditors knocked at their door. The police kept coming to the house, looking for clues, but everything pointed back to Thomas. And still, There was no answer for why he was imprisoned, no way to prove his innocence. Lily, on the other hand, felt the weight of the changes in a different way. Her heart ached every time she saw other children playing with their fathers or laughing in the park. She missed their family trips, the quiet moments when her father would sit with her and tell her stories. Most of all, she missed hearing his voice, his laughter echoing through their home. It felt like a part of her was missing, a part that could never be replaced. Her days became filled with silence. The walls of the house, once filled with laughter and life, now seemed cold and empty. Eleanor tried to keep things normal for Lily, but it was clear that both of them were struggling. Lily would sit in her room, staring out of the window, hoping to see her father return, but he never did. Every night, she would lie in bed, her pillow wet with tears, wondering why her family had been torn apart. She also noticed how distant her mother had become. Eleanor was always busy on the phone or with lawyers, trying to find a way to get Thomas out of jail. The bright and loving woman Lily had known was now weighed down by worry and exhaustion. Her mother was no longer the same. She barely had time to talk with Lily, let alone play or read her bedtime stories like they used to. Lily could feel the sadness in her mother's eyes, the fear she tried so hard to hide. Though Lily didn't fully understand the details, she could sense the tension around her. She felt abandoned in a way, not just by her father but by the whole world. Her friends at school stopped inviting her to playdates. The other parents whispered behind her back, avoiding eye contact when they saw her. It was clear that people in the community had started to judge her family. The fall from grace had been so sudden and harsh that it seemed like no one wanted to be associated with the Evans family anymore. Despite this, Lily never gave up hope. She still believed that her father would return. She told herself that the whole situation was just a misunderstanding. In her heart, she couldn't imagine her father doing anything wrong. He had always been kind, generous, and fair. There had to be some mistake. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the loneliness grew harder to bear. Lily spent her time in her room, drawing pictures of happy times with her parents. She would draw them sitting in their favorite spots at home, laughing together. In her drawings, everything was perfect again. It was the only way she could feel close to her father. But as time passed, Lily realized that her mother wasn't as hopeful as she once was. Eleanor's attempts to explain things to Lily became fewer, and her eyes grew tired. Lily knew her mother was hiding something, but she couldn't quite figure out what. She felt like there was something bigger happening that no one was telling her about. One evening, after finishing her homework, Lily decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't just sit around feeling sorry for herself. She needed to do something, anything, to help her father. As she sat on her bed, surrounded by the quiet stillness of the house, a thought crossed her mind. What if she could help him herself? Little did she know, Lily's journey was about to take a turn that would change everything. But she wouldn't be alone. One person in her life who had always been there would soon step forward to protect her and her family in ways no one could have imagined. Maria had always been a quiet, hard-working woman. She didn't have much, but she had something that many others didn't: integrity. For years, she had worked in the Evans household, taking care of the things others often overlooked: the cleaning, the cooking, the little details that kept the household running smoothly. She had watched Lily grow from a small, giggling baby into the bright and curious young girl she was now. She had seen Thomas work late into the night, driven by the desire to make his family proud. And she had seen Eleanor, always the calm and supportive figure, doing her best to hold everything together. Maria was an immigrant who had come to the country with nothing. She worked hard every day, doing jobs that many people looked down on. But for Maria, it wasn't about the job. It was about the people she worked for. The Evans family had treated her with respect, unlike many others. They had given her a place to live, a steady paycheck, and most importantly, they had treated her as part of the family. Thomas and Eleanor had always made sure she felt appreciated, and that meant a lot to her. Despite her position as a maid, Maria had a unique perspective on the Evans family. She had seen the love between Thomas and Eleanor, the way Thomas doted on Lily, and the way the entire family supported one another through thick and thin. Maria wasn't just a maid to them. She was a trusted member of their household, someone they could rely on. And she, in turn, was loyal to them. But when the news of Thomas's arrest broke, Maria's world changed. She had been there when the police arrived, watching as Thomas was taken away in handcuffs. She had seen the pain on Eleanor's face and the confusion in Lily's eyes. Maria had heard the whispers, the rumors that spread quickly in the neighborhood. People didn't know the truth, and Maria could feel their judgment, even though she knew Thomas was innocent. But there was nothing she could do. She was just a maid after all, and who would listen to her? Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the Evans household grew. Eleanor was overwhelmed, trying to keep the family together while dealing with the financial pressures and the public scrutiny. She spent hours on the phone with lawyers and trying to figure out how to get Thomas out of jail, but the walls seemed to be closing in. The company was failing, bills were piling up, and the house, once full of life, now felt empty and cold. Maria could see how much Eleanor was struggling. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how. She wasn't a lawyer, and she didn't have the money to fix things. But she knew one thing: Thomas was innocent. She had worked in the Evans household for years, and she knew the kind of man he was. He had always been fair, generous, and kind. There was no way he could have committed the crime they accused him of. One evening, as Maria was cleaning the kitchen, she overheard a conversation between two lawyers that made her blood run cold. They were discussing the case, and one of them mentioned how the evidence against Thomas seemed too perfect. Maria froze. She didn't need to hear more. She already knew what had happened. Richard, Thomas's business partner, had framed him. It was the only explanation that made sense. Richard had always been involved in the company's financial matters, and now Thomas was behind bars, while Richard was free. Maria felt a surge of anger rise inside her. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in her small room, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Thomas and his family needed her. She had always been a quiet, humble woman, but she couldn't ignore the truth anymore. If Richard could betray Thomas, then Maria could stand up for him. She had to. The next morning, Maria made a decision. She would go to the police. It was a risky move, and she knew there could be consequences, but she couldn't stay silent. She knew the truth, and it was time to share it. Maria spent the day gathering her thoughts and preparing what she would say. She knew the police wouldn't take her seriously. She was just the maid after all. But she had worked in that house long enough to know the details of the business dealings, the finances, and the interactions between Richard and Thomas. She had seen the signs. Richard had been stealing from the company for months, if not longer. Now he was trying to cover his tracks by framing Thomas for the crimes he had committed. When Maria finally walked into the police station, her heart was racing. She had never been in a situation like this before. She was just a simple woman who had worked in the background of a powerful family. But today, she wasn't just a maid. She was someone who knew the truth and was willing to risk everything to make it known. "I need to speak to someone about the Evans case," Maria said to the officer behind the desk. The officer looked at her skeptically. "You're the maid, right? What do you know about this case?" Maria stood tall, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "I know everything. I know that Thomas Evans is innocent. It's Richard Hayward, his business partner. He's the one who stole the money." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly doubtful. But Maria didn't back down. She told him everything she knew about the fake invoices, the money transfers, and the way Richard had manipulated the company's finances. She explained how Richard had been hiding the stolen money and framing Thomas to take the fall. The officer listened carefully, taking notes. "This is serious," he said. "We'll look into it." "Thank you for coming forward." Maria nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She didn't know if this would be enough to free Thomas, but she knew she had done the right thing. She had risked everything, not for herself, but for the family who had treated her like their own. As she left the police station, Maria felt a strange sense of hope. She had taken the first step in uncovering the truth. Now it was up to the law to do its part. But one thing was certain: she wasn't going to let Richard get away with what he had done. The day after Maria spoke to the police, she didn't know what to expect. Part of her was hopeful that the truth would come out, that Thomas would be freed, and everything would go back to the way it was. But another part of her was scared. She knew how powerful Richard was, and the idea that she had taken a step to expose him made her feel like she was walking on a dangerous path. The Evans family had always treated her with respect, but would they even believe her story? Would the police take her seriously, or would they dismiss her as just another housekeeper making things up? Maria couldn't stop thinking about the family she had worked for. She had spent years watching them, Thomas, Eleanor, and little Lily. She had watched Lily grow from a shy, quiet child into a lively, curious girl. The Evans family had been more than just her employers. They had been her friends, her support system. And now Thomas, the man who had built everything for them, was wrongfully imprisoned. Maria had to do something to help. She couldn't just stand by. As the days passed, Maria found herself returning to the police station. The officers had told her they would investigate, but she couldn't wait any longer. She knew how long things like this took, how easy it was for powerful people to bury the truth. She couldn't let Richard get away with framing Thomas. She had seen enough of Richard's behavior to know he wasn't the man everyone thought he was. He was greedy, manipulative, and he cared about no one but himself. Maria had always been a quiet woman, someone who kept to herself and did her work without asking for attention. But now she had no choice. If she wanted to save Thomas and his family, she had to be brave. She had to act. That afternoon, Maria went back to the police station, this time with more urgency in her step. She couldn't just sit back anymore. She needed to ensure that her story was heard, that the evidence she knew about Richard's wrongdoings would not be ignored. She walked up to the same officer she had spoken to the day before. He remembered her, and his face softened when he saw her. "Maria, right? I remember what you told me." "We're still looking into it," he said. "I don't want to wait anymore," Maria said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I know you're busy, but I'm telling you, Richard is guilty. I can help you find more evidence. I can give you everything I know." The officer looked at her, his eyes flickering with thought. "We've been following leads, Maria, but I'm not going to lie, your testimony alone won't be enough to prove Richard's guilt. You'll need hard evidence. If you have something like that, it could make all the difference." Maria nodded. "I do," she said quietly. "I've seen the bank transfers. I've seen the fake invoices. Richard hid everything. He was careful, but I know where he took the money. I can help you find it." The officer's eyes widened. "Are you sure about this, Maria? This is dangerous. Richard won't go down easily." Maria took a deep breath, her heart racing, but she was sure. She had seen Richard's actions up close, and she knew what he had done. He wasn't just stealing money. He was destroying an innocent family. And she couldn't let him get away with it. Not while Thomas and Eleanor, who had always treated her like family, were suffering. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "I know where he kept the documents. I know how he hid the money. If you'll just trust me, I can help you catch him." The officer hesitated, then nodded. "All right, we'll send someone with you. But Maria, be careful. This isn't something to take lightly." Maria didn't need to be told twice. She knew how dangerous it could be to go up against someone like Richard. He had money, power, and influence, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who had the power to change the course of events, to bring the truth to light. And she wouldn't let fear stop her. Later that day, Maria was joined by 2 detectives from the police department. They followed her to a small storage unit, tucked away behind a nondescript warehouse. It was a place Richard had used to hide some of his more questionable documents. Maria had seen him go there before, but she had never thought much of it. Now it was her chance to gather the proof she needed. The detectives watched closely as Maria unlocked the unit. Inside, she pulled out several boxes filled with old files and papers. "This is it," she said, her hands shaking slightly as she flipped through the pages. "Richard kept everything here. These invoices are fake. These transfers are all covered up." The detectives carefully examined the documents, taking note of the information Maria had uncovered. As they went through the boxes, it became clear that Richard had been embezzling money from the company for a long time. He had covered his tracks well, but the evidence Maria had helped them find was undeniable. "This is huge," one of the detectives said, his voice filled with amazement. "This could bring Richard down for good." Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her. They were getting closer. Thomas's name would be cleared, and Richard would finally pay for his crimes. But there was still more work to be done. The detectives would need to gather everything they had found, verify it, and present it to the courts. But for now, Maria knew she had done the right thing. As she left the storage unit and walked back to her car, Maria couldn't help but think of Lily. She was doing this for the little girl who had lost her father. She was doing this for Thomas and Eleanor, who had always shown her kindness. Maria was risking everything, but she had no doubt it was the right thing to do. When she returned to the Evans home, she found Eleanor in the living room, looking more tired than usual. Her face lit up when she saw Maria. "Did you find something?" Eleanor asked, her voice filled with hope. Maria nodded. "We're getting closer. Richard won't be able to hide for long. The truth is coming out." Eleanor sighed in relief. "Thank you, Maria. I don't know what we would have done without you." Maria gave her a small smile. "Your family. I would do anything for you." As Maria walked away, she felt a sense of accomplishment. She had taken action, and the truth was finally starting to surface. But this was only the beginning. The fight wasn't over yet, and she was ready to see it through to the end. It was a cold morning when the truth began to unravel. After weeks of gathering evidence and carefully piecing together the puzzle, Maria's actions had set the stage for something much bigger. The police were ready to make their move. The case had taken a dramatic turn, and the quiet woman, who had once been just a maid, was now at the center of it all. Maria had always been a person of few words, someone who preferred to observe and listen rather than make a fuss. But as the days went on, she realized that the silence could no longer protect them. She could no longer stay hidden in the shadows. She had seen how Richard had ruined Thomas's life, framing him for crimes he didn't commit. The Evans family was broken, and it was all because of Richard's greed. But now, everything was about to change. Maria sat in the small, humble living room of the Evans house, waiting for the phone call that would signal the start of the end for Richard. It had been a long, exhausting few weeks. There had been moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if they would ever find the truth, but today felt different. Today, she had hope. Eleanor, Thomas's wife, paced nervously in the kitchen, her eyes red from sleepless nights spent worrying about her husband's fate. Lily was in her room, trying to keep busy with her schoolwork, though her heart was heavy with the uncertainty of her father's situation. Eleanor hadn't told her much, not wanting to burden her with the full weight of what was happening. But Lily knew something important was about to happen. She could feel it. Maria, too, could sense the shift in the air. It wasn't just about the evidence anymore. It was about the truth coming to light. She had known all along that Richard's lies would eventually catch up with him, but seeing it unfold before her eyes was something entirely different. It was a strange feeling, knowing that she had played a part in bringing justice to the family she had come to care for so much. The phone rang suddenly, breaking the tense silence in the room. Maria's heart skipped a beat as she grabbed the receiver. "This is Detective Grant," the voice on the other end said. "We have the evidence. We're moving forward." Maria let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The long fight was finally paying off. Richard's web of lies was crumbling. "I knew you would," Maria said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you. Just ... Please, make sure the truth gets out. Thomas deserves to be free." Detective Grant assured her that they would act quickly. He told her that they would make an arrest soon, and they were ready to present everything they had gathered to the authorities. The police had found Richard's hidden accounts, the fake invoices, the bank transfers, and all the documentation that proved Thomas had been framed. Richard had thought he could get away with it, but Maria had ensured that wouldn't happen. "Thank you, Maria," the detective said again. "This wouldn't have been possible without your help." Maria hung up the phone and looked toward the kitchen, where Eleanor stood, waiting for any news. She nodded at Maria, silently asking the question they had both been waiting for. "They've got him," Maria said softly. "It's over. Richard will pay for what he did." Eleanor's face was a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had spent so many sleepless nights wondering if this day would ever come, and now, finally, it was here. She wiped away a tear, not sure if she should be happy or angry, but knowing one thing for certain: her husband was innocent, and the truth was finally out. That afternoon, the police raided Richard Hayward's office, arresting him without warning. Richard had always believed he was untouchable. He had manipulated, lied, and stolen for years, and no one had ever questioned him. But now his world was collapsing. The weight of his greed and deceit had finally caught up with him. News of Richard's arrest spread quickly. The media were all over it, shocked by the revelation that the man once seen as a trusted partner to Thomas Evans was nothing more than a thief and a liar. Richard's carefully constructed image began to fall apart. No one could deny the evidence now. His empire of lies had crumbled, and the truth had finally come to light. Thomas sat in his prison cell, staring at the gray walls, his thoughts distant. For so long, he had been trapped in the nightmare of a crime he didn't commit. Every day had been a battle to keep his sanity intact. He had always known in his heart that he was innocent, but proving it felt like an impossible task. His lawyers had worked tirelessly, but without solid evidence, they couldn't make any headway. The world outside had moved on without him, and he was left to rot in a cell, far from his family, far from the life he had built. But today, everything changed. He received the news from his lawyer, who told him that the case was being reopened. Richard had been arrested, and the evidence was clear. Thomas's name would be cleared, and he would be released. For the first time in what felt like forever, Thomas allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. His heart raced as he processed the words. He would be free. He would return to his family. He couldn't wait to hold Lily again, to see Eleanor's face without the sadness that had been there for so long. He was coming home. That evening, as the sun set and the first stars appeared in the sky, the Evans family gathered together. Maria was there too, standing quietly in the corner, watching as the family reunited. Eleanor and Lily were sitting on the couch, holding hands, their faces filled with relief. They were no longer trapped in the fear of uncertainty. Thomas was coming home, and the man who had caused all their pain would face justice. When the doorbell rang, Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She knew who it was. The moment they had all been waiting for had arrived. And when Thomas walked through the door, his face tired but filled with a sense of peace, Eleanor ran to him, wrapping him in a tight embrace. Lily, tears in her eyes, hugged him next. It was a moment they had all dreamed of, a moment they never thought would come. Maria stood back, watching quietly. She had played her part, and now she could finally rest. The truth had come out, and justice had been served. The sun was shining brightly over the Evans family estate, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged just months before. The mansion, which had once felt like a prison of fear and uncertainty, now stood as a symbol of hope and resilience. After everything that had happened, Thomas's wrongful imprisonment, the betrayal by Richard, and the deep sorrow they had endured, the family was finally starting to breathe again. Their nightmare was over, It was a fresh start. And though the wounds from the past would take time to heal, there was a quiet sense of peace in the air that had been missing for so long. Thomas Evans sat in the garden, the cool breeze ruffling his hair as he watched his daughter Lily running across the grass. Her laughter filled the air, echoing in the vast open space of their yard. It was the sound he had missed most during his time in prison, the sound of innocence, of life going on despite everything. Eleanor was nearby, sipping tea on the porch, her eyes following Lily's every move. She looked at Thomas, a soft smile on her lips. It had been a long journey to get here, to this moment where everything felt right again. The past few months had been a blur of courtrooms, legal battles, and heartache. But now, it was over. They had their family back, and they had each other. They had won. "I can't believe it's finally over," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. She had always been strong, holding the family together through the darkest times. But now, for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of the relief. Her hand reached out to take Thomas's, squeezing it gently. Thomas looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have gotten through it without you, Eleanor. You were the one who kept us going. You kept believing when I didn't know how." Eleanor shook her head, a small chuckle escaping her lips. "It wasn't just me. We got through this because of Maria. If it weren't for her, none of this would have happened." The mention of Maria made Thomas pause. He looked up at the house, as if expecting to see her standing there. Maria had been more than just a maid to them. She had been their lifeline, their protector, their unsung hero. It was because of her bravery, her refusal to stay silent, that they had their lives back. "Where is she?" Thomas asked. Eleanor glanced over at Maria, who was sitting on the steps of the porch, a soft smile on her face as she watched them. "She's right there, as always." Keeping to herself as usual, Thomas walked over to her, his steps slow and deliberate, as though unsure if he should disturb the quiet space she had created for herself. But when he reached her, he knelt down and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maria, I don't know how to thank you," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us. You saved me." Maria looked up at him, her dark eyes calm and steady. "I didn't do anything special, Mr. Evans," she said softly. "I just told the truth. It was the least I could do after everything you've done for me. You treated me like family when no one else did." "I could never repay you for that," Thomas shook his head. "It's not about repaying. It's about what you did for us. You risked everything to stand up for what's right. That's not something many people would have the courage to do." Maria smiled, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. You've always treated me with respect. I couldn't let you suffer because of someone else's lies." Eleanor joined them, placing a hand gently on Maria's arm. "You're more than just a maid to us, Maria. You're family. Always have been, always will be." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that resonated deeply within Maria's heart. She had spent so many years working for others, never expecting anything in return. But now, hearing those words "you re-family," she realized how much she had truly become a part of their lives. Lily ran over, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, look what I found!" she exclaimed, holding up a small butterfly she had carefully caught in her hands. Her eyes sparkled with joy. Thomas smiled and took the butterfly gently from her hands, admiring the delicate wings. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he said. "Just like you," Lily beamed, proud of her discovery. She turned to Maria, her face full of curiosity. "Do you want to see it, Maria?" Maria nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at the little girl. "I'd love to." As they all gathered together in the garden, the weight of the past seemed to slip away, bit by bit. The world outside had moved on, and though the scars of the past would never fully disappear, the Evans family was stronger than ever. They had been tested, pushed to their limits, and yet, here they were together, alive and free. It wasn't just the fact that they had won the battle. It was that they had come out of it with a deeper understanding of the people around them. Thomas realized that true wealth wasn't measured by money or success. It was measured by the people who stood beside you when the world tried to tear you apart. His family, and even Maria, had stood by him when he had nothing. That was the kind of wealth that mattered. Later that evening, as the stars twinkled above, the Evans family sat around the dinner table, sharing a meal that felt like a celebration of everything they had overcome. Maria sat with them, not as a maid, but as an equal and important part of their family. Thomas raised his glass, his voice full of emotion. "To new beginnings," he said, looking around at the people who had stood by him. "And to the truth, which always finds a way to come out, no matter how dark the days may seem." Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening with pride. "To new beginnings," she repeated, her voice steady and filled with hope. As they all raised their glasses and clinked them together, Lily laughed, the sound light and carefree. For the first time in a long while, there was nothing to worry about. The future was theirs to build, and this time, they would do it together. Maria looked around the table, her heart full. She had helped restore a family, and in doing so, she had found a family of her own.